My name is Michelle Fournier, Michel Fournier in French, and I am a French and sometimes Spanish teacher in Falmouth, Maine. And today is Monday, but we don't have school. We don't have school because it is what we call a snow day. So in Maine, we get a lot of snow, and yesterday and today we had a blizzard. So a blizzard is high winds and lots of snow over a sustained period of time. And when there's a lot of snow, obviously we can't get out of our driveways, as you will see from the picture of our driveway. And so unusually, last night they actually called school off in my town. So each town decides if they are going to have school or not based on the weather conditions. And usually we find that out in the morning. We'll get a text message or an announcement on the website or a phone call from our district, depending on how the school chooses to do it. And the superintendent, who is the head of all of the schools, will say, no school today, it's too dangerous. So usually that happens the morning of the storm, but because this was a blizzard and we have over a foot of snow and it is still snowing, and it started last night, actually yesterday afternoon, they decided to call school off the day before. So I didn't even have to set my alarm. I knew that I wasn't coming to school today. And that means that today is a perfect day to make cookies because I can't go anywhere. It's very snowy and they have not plowed my driveway yet and the roads are dangerous. So I'm going to make the most traditional type of dessert in the United States besides maybe apple pie, chocolate chip cookies. So when you make cookies, the most important thing to do to start out with is make sure you have all your ingredients. But I did that yesterday because I knew I would not be able to make it to the store because of the snow. So I have all my ingredients and I have taken out my eggs because the eggs need to be room temperature. So I took out my 2 eggs and then I took out my butter a few hours ago from the freezer. So butter looks different in the United States than in France. It comes in these little sticks. We call them sticks. And you have 4 sticks in a box, and I keep them in the freezer so that anytime I have the need to make cookies, I have butter available, but it needs to be soft. So I have taken that out, and that's all ready to go. If you forget to take your butter out, you can put it in the microwave for a few seconds and soften it, but it's better to have it at room temperature. The next thing I'm going to do is grease the cookie sheets. So I'm going to get some shortening. So this is shortening, and I have some waxed paper here. And I will grease the cookie sheets so that the cookies don't stick. And you don't need very much, just a thin layer. And I always use 2 cookie sheets because that way I can be efficient and get one batch ready while the other one is cooking. Sometimes I use 3, but I think I'll just use 2 today. So my cookie sheets are all ready to go. The recipe that I'm using comes from what my daughters and I call the Baking Book of Awesomeness. That's not its real title, but we find many, many good recipes in here. I have great recipes for French tarts that I make in there, but also good old American chocolate chip cookies. So the author of this book is Dory Greenspan, and it's very important to have a good chocolate chip cookie recipe. There are many, many recipes and different schools of thought. Should the cookie be crispy? Should it be chewy? Should it be crispy on the outside, soft on the inside? So everybody has their different ideas about, their own ideas about what makes the best chocolate chip cookie recipe. This is the one that I found after years and years of experimentation that I happen to like the best. I do have some variations on cookie recipes. For example, I have a mocha chocolate chip cookie recipe, which has a little bit of coffee in it and cinnamon, and I really like that one a lot as well. I also often make oatmeal chocolate chip cookies, which give the illusion of being a little healthier, so I feel less guilty about eating more of those. But I'm just going to make plain old traditional chocolate chip cookies today. So another thing that is often questioned in making chocolate chip cookies is, do you want to have nuts in them or not? So if I'm making these for my students, which I sometimes will, although I usually make them French desserts, I probably wouldn't include nuts because a lot of people have allergies. And I personally like a few nuts, but not a lot of nuts. So this recipe calls for a cup of chopped pecans or walnuts. I'm using walnuts. And I usually make that a scant cup because I don't like to have too many, but I like the substance of it and the little extra bit of crunch. The texture also adds, or the walnuts add texture to the recipe as well. And so I like that, and it does add flavor, but I don't like the flavor of the walnuts to overpower the chocolate because really it's all about the chocolate. So I'm going to chop up a few of these nuts and measure them. Sometimes I use the food processor to chop the nuts, but I also enjoy chopping the nuts. So if there aren't a lot of them, I don't mind doing it by hand, and I find it satisfying, and it gives a little bit more control as to the size of the nuts. So I like them pretty finely chopped. Some people like them to have a little bit more of to make a little bit more of a statement in the cookie, and so they want them to have bigger slices, but I don't want them to be the defining feature of my cookie, so I slice them pretty finely. So I have chopped a scant cup of nuts. It's not quite a cup. So a cup is not like a cup, like my coffee cup, okay, which has a nice, beautiful Maine image on it. It's a specific measurement. So if you are trying to make an American recipe and it says 2 cups, you can't just take a coffee cup and dump them in. It's very specific. You should buy American measuring cups. For example, this is a 1/2 cup, and this is for liquid measure, but I use it for the nuts too. And it says 1 cup right there. There's 2 cups is there. So anyway, I have chopped some nuts, and I'm going to put them in a bowl for later, because now I'm going to prepare the chocolate chips, and I'm going to use the same measuring cup, so I don't have as many dishes to do. Again, chocolate chips are a very important part of this, and I'm very picky about my chocolate chips. So I do not buy inexpensive chocolate chips. I buy the good brand because your chocolate chip cookie is only as good as your chips. And I also like to include a variety. So you'll see here I have semi-sweet chocolate chips. Ghirardelli is a good brand. And so I have some of those, and these are not too big. So you can see these are pretty small. They are semi-sweet. So I'm going to put a few in here for starters. Then I have bittersweet chips, which are not as sweet, and I like to have a variety, both for flavor and for texture, because you will notice these are a little bit bigger, and the flavor is different. So I'm going to put a few of those in there as well, because I like to have some of each. Then I also like to chop up a little bit of chocolate, because again, it gives a different texture, and I like to have a few bigger chunks of chocolate. So this is actually a very expensive brand, but so I'll use just a few of these. So this is Guitar, it's from San Francisco, and these are baking wafers, and they are also semi-sweet. So I'm just going to chop up very, very roughly chopped. I'm going to chop up a few of these to put in, and the total amount of chips is going to be 2 cups. Now, you'll see later that I will maybe add a few extras if I need to, because you want to make sure that you have a lot of chips in each cookie, because nothing's worse than getting a chocolate chip cookie and not having very many chocolate chips in it. So sometimes you have to adjust when you get toward the end of the batch to make sure that you have enough chocolate chips. So now I have 2 cups of chocolate chips and chocolate bits that I have chopped. And another thing that you always should do is just make sure the chocolate chips haven't spoiled. Okay, so now I have my chocolate chips and my nuts all cut and chopped and ready to go. And so now I'm going to mix together the dry ingredients. So again, I'm going to use my American measuring cup, and I need 2 cups of flour. So this is not a flour that you grow in your garden. This is cooking flour. It's spelled differently. And for the flour, you have to be pretty precise. This is ½ a cup, because if you have too much flour, your cookies will not taste good. 1 cup. This is very exciting. 1½ cups. And 2 cups. So there's my flour. Now I also need baking soda and salt. I'm going to consult my recipe. 1 teaspoon of salt. So I tend to undersalt my recipes a little bit because I don't like too much salt. It's not good for you. This recipe says you can add 1¼ teaspoons if you really like salt, but I put just under a teaspoon typically. So this is ½ teaspoon, and again, it's not like this is a tablespoon and this is a teaspoon, but it's good to have the actual measurements so that you get the right amount. So here's ½ teaspoon and 1 teaspoon. And then I need 3/4 teaspoon of baking soda. So baking soda and baking powder are not the same thing, and you need to make sure you get the right product or your cookies will not be the right height and so forth. So I need 3/4 teaspoon, and I need another 1/4 teaspoon. And I'm going to just eyeball this. In other words, I'm not measuring it super precisely. And that'll do it. I will mix those together with a fork and put those aside so that I can do the wet ingredients. So now I'm putting in the butter into my mixing bowl, because the mixing bowl will do a good job at making sure everything is evenly mixed. And the butter is nice and soft because it's at room temperature. And I need both sticks. So I will do those and then move on to the next step. Okay. So you can see that the butter was nice and soft. And then I need to make sure all of the pieces got mixed. Good. Now I need 1 cup of sugar. So I'm going to add the sugars. I need brown sugar and white sugar. So here's my white sugar. And I'm using the same measuring cup as before, again, so that we don't have too many dishes. And so this is ½ cup, and I need 1 cup, so I need 2 of these. And I'm going to beat it right into the butter. This clearly needs a little help. And this is called creaming the butter and sugar. That's a cooking term. And scrape down the sides. looks pretty good. Now I need brown sugar, and I need 2/3 of a cup. So I have to use my 1/3 measure. And I'm going to get a spoon. And it needs to be packed, which means I have to push it down so that there is not a lot of air in it. And there's light brown sugar and dark brown sugar. Dark brown sugar has a little more molasses in it, but most of the time I use light brown sugar. It's also a personal preference. If you use dark brown sugar, it has a little bit of a richer, sweeter flavor. So that's packed pretty well. And this is going to come out in a big clump. So my brown sugar and butter are nicely creamed. Now I'm going to add the vanilla. And again, I like to use high quality vanilla, even though it's a little bit more expensive, because I love vanilla and it adds so much good flavor. So I need 2 teaspoons. This is a 1/2 teaspoon, so I need to count to 4, 2, 3, 4. And I never worry if I put a little too much vanilla. I tend to put maybe 1/4 teaspoon extra in my cookies because I really like the flavor of vanilla, as does my husband. And so we're going to not scrimp. I'll mix in the vanilla. It smells good. And again, remembering to scrape down the sides frequently and getting at the bottom to make sure everything's even. And that's a nice consistency. And then I need to add the eggs, and the eggs are at room temperature. And I always crack them into a separate bowl just in case I get a shell in it by mistake. And I will tell you the joke that I tell my students every year: why do the French always only eat 1 egg? Because 1 egg is enough. Get it? Enough? Okay. So I tell that joke every year to my students and they roll their eyes at me. So 1 egg is not enough because I need 2 eggs in this recipe. But you have to beat them separately. No shells. Number 2. You want to make sure that's nicely beat in there. And then I will add the dry ingredients. So you want to do this fairly slowly and at low speed, because if I put it on high speed, it will all fly into my face, and although that would be very amusing for the video, it's not so good for the cookies. So I just wait till the flour gets incorporated a little bit, and then I add a little more. So now I'm going to add the walnuts. And I like to do this in the mixer because it helps to mix them fairly evenly. And then the most exciting part, the chocolate chips. So I am now preheating the oven. In the United States we use Fahrenheit, not Celsius, so I'm heating the oven to 370 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I have my batter, and I'm going to mix it just a little bit more to make sure the chocolate chips are evenly distributed, and the nuts. And then I need to put them on the cookie sheet. So, sometimes when you're making cookies, you need to roll them into balls with your fingers and your hands get all gooey. But for these, you just drop them onto the cookie sheet. So I'm going to use 2 spoons. So I put the dough on 1 teaspoon, and then I take the back of the other one and just push it off. There we go. And I try to have a chocolate chip kind of on the top so that it will be right in the middle and it will look pretty when it's all baked. And usually I can fit 6 on a cookie sheet. Okay, so now I will put the cookies in the oven because the oven is all preheated, and they are supposed to cook for 10 to 12 minutes. Again, this is partially personal preference, how well done you want them, how crispy you want them, and so forth. I have set my timer for 10 minutes so that I can be reminded that I should check them. A lot of it is just looking at the color and how browned they are. While those are in the oven, I'm going to get my next batch ready. So, putting that there. I also did my dishes because I like to do my dishes as I go along. It's something my mom and my sister Sue always stressed when I was learning how to cook as a kid. So I try to do that, and then it makes for easier cleanup later. And it gives you something to do while you're waiting for the cookies to finish cooking. So, after having checked the cookies a couple of times, these look about right. So I'll put the next batch in. And you want to make sure that they are browned around the edges and just a little bit browned on the top. And the other important thing is to take them off the cookie sheet quickly because they will continue cooking on the cookie sheet if you don't. So I'm going to put them on my cookie rack here so that they can cool. Another way to check is just to look at the bottom and make sure they're lightly brown on the bottom. And I will put my pot holder there and leave this here. And I'm not going to put the cookie dough on it immediately because then they will start cooking on the cookie sheet, and I don't want them to do that because they will not cook evenly. And so I'll wait about 2 or 3 minutes, and then I will put the next set of scoops onto the cookie sheet so that they are ready to go in when the other batch is ready. And I've reset the timer for about 12 minutes. You don't want to eat the cookies immediately out of the oven because they're very, 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 very hot. However, you probably want to have a taste when they're still warm because they're amazing when they're still warm. The chocolate chips are all melty and they just melt in your mouth. So there's nothing like warm cookies. When I was a little girl, my mom often would make cookies and have them ready when I came home from school, and it was great because I would walk in the door and I would open the door and I would smell the cookies, and it just made my day. It was fabulous. So that's one of my greatest childhood memories, and I hope that you all get to smell homemade cookies at some point in your lives. So the other thing about chocolate chip cookies is how amazingly good the dough is. So when I am making cookies, and especially when my daughters were younger, they would come in and they would just stick their fingers in there and take out a piece of cookie dough or take a spoon and have some cookie dough, or they would want to lick the spatula. There is even an ice cream in the United States that's called chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream, which is really, really good. So it's vanilla ice cream with chunks of chocolate chip cookie dough in it, and it's delicious. So eating the dough is a big part of making chocolate chip cookies. Okay, so now we have the cookies nice and warm. And if you notice, if you break the cookie, it's all melty and delicious. So one of the traditional things to do is to take your cookie and dip it in some good milk. And American milk is much tastier than French milk, I have to say. And it's really yummy. So the milk goes very nicely with the cookie. Mmm.
Dunking.
And you want to share your cookies with people that you love.
Salut classe, je m'appelle le homme au foyer et le chef de cuisine, mais j'adore le pâtissier ici et aussi le chef de ma vie. J'adore les biscuits.
So some people prefer
Avec café.
coffee.
With coffee. Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And our fabulous filmmaker, Annika Dyhrberg, is currently standing behind the camera, eating a cookie and dipping it in a beautiful big glass of milk, but she's a little camera shy today. So she's just doing the filming, but she likes the cookies too.
Excellent.